Welcome everybody in my summary video for the my latest project when I captured that fallen tree that I found in the neighborhood. I'm gonna tell you about how I make everything from A to Z, basically all of the issues that I got. And if you don't want to watch that video, I expect it gonna be 20-25 minutes. You just can read the whole wall of the text that is on that side of the upload on the ArtStation. If you want to listen along just on the side that video, feel free, because I'm gonna try to explain everything verbally than showing, but obviously it will be not possible. So because there's a lot of things to talk about, let's start with the ZBrush, not ZBrush, but reality capture. So first of all, amount of pictures. The model itself wasn't that big, but I prefer to always overshoot than not use that have a too small amount of pictures. In theory it was 670 pictures, but I use in the end 643. That's because first when I capture something, at first I take a picture of the ruler that set up a scale for our object, and then I take pictures from the distance from the object around a couple meters to capture a bigger chunk of it. In theory we're supposed to take a picture that show the whole model, then take a step closer to have a smaller chunk of the object, but still a lot to allow reality capture or other photogrammetry solution align your closer pictures, detail pictures, way better. And that approach have an additional goal, because I decide to use markers. I place them on the ground, and that allow additional layer of the precision during the alignment and reconstruction of the object. If you use meta shape, I believe you're still able to use those markers, but reality capture allows you to use them even in the PPI, the cheapest version of the software. So that's why I just use those, and suggest you to do that as well if you use reality capture. So let's see, detail picture from the close-up were quite easy to do, except top part of the model up here. Let's turn those cameras off at first, because that element maybe looks like it's above the ground by quite solid amount of space, but it was just 30 centimeters, something like that. So I tried to capture everything from the bottom. But because that tree, let's see other pictures from the distance maybe. As you can see, that tree, maybe it was dead, but it contained a lot of small branches everywhere with the leaves. So I didn't want to risk any kind of misalignment, because I broke or bent one of those twigs. So I tried to keep my distance, etc. But overall, the capture itself wasn't that bad, because model was on the ground, so I could capture one row of pictures. Let's focus, thank you very much. So as you can see, I make one row of pictures from around the object, because it was round, so I make a cylindrical capture, then take a step on the side, another set of pictures, and then I walk around the branch, around the trunk, and make that same pattern on that side. The exception was a root part, when I decided to take way more close-up pictures, just in case, to capture the bottom part, to separate it from the ground, because I was aware that it is possible to recreate those roots, individual ones, and that's gonna provide me a way better, I'm gonna waste less time than playing with ZBrush and separating that from the ground, then reconstruct those. Yeah, So everything to save as much time as possible. And then there was another issue with the branch that was on the bottom of the capture. As you can see, I use quite few control points, and that's because when I was capturing that model from here, as you can see, it was possible to, let's turn that cage off at first, mesh modeling, reconstruct, clean the region. My camera catch up those elements from here, and because it wasn't that bright, I use longer, well, I try to use as long focal length as possible, but because of how the scene was dark, etc., I need to make decision, deep of field or ISO, that kind of things. I try to use tripod, but because the ground wasn't that stable, I decided to try and capture everything by hand. In the end, I was under 1/60 of the capture speed, and it was good enough to have sharp pictures, as you can see. But that element of the tree was create quite issues because of the blurriness of those. So let's take a quick look at control points that I create. But in the end, I decided that part of the model is not as much important as the whole model itself, because it's gonna be dark from the bottom, there's no way to capture it. Then I'm gonna remove the ground itself, and as you can see, the solid chunk of that branch is submerged in the leaves. So creative decision was to just remove it completely and just close the hole itself. Up here, as you can see, those control points pictures are quite sharp, which was great, but once again, deep of field from that part create issues. So comparing the raw scan data with the cleanup, as you can see, quite nice cutout without any kind of bigger issues with anything. So after that, when we have a raw scan data, it was obviously time for a ZBrush to clean up anything that we don't want. So small tweaks, etc., etc. Small disclaimer was that I recreate that model with my typical workflow at first. So I remove everything that wasn't necessary. Then I close holes and use typical brushes like a clay build-up and everything to recreate that shape by hand. And then I was usually using brushes like a extractor dot, that kind of things, to borrow surface details from one part of the model and populate them on the other one. But that workflow didn't provide, well, I received a really great feedback from Matteo with the suggestion that approach was okay, but details weren't good enough, didn't provide convincing results, and he suggests to try something else. So when I was quite content from the quality, because I copy paste details with those brushes and use seamless materials that I create from the different part of the model. Let's quickly jump to the folder itself. Let's see, that's export those pictures. I cut out part. Usually, I cut out part of the model, create a seamless material in Art Engine, and populate those materials across the empty space, because with ZBrush extractor we just operate on the geometry. We don't have any kind of information about the texture, so we need to use Substance Painter or something else to populate that empty space with the texture. So seamless materials, especially extracted from the model itself, are super useful. But let's go to my portfolio upload. Up here, as you can see, the final effect was quite convincing, at least for me. We have a moss, we have a wood and everything, even some part of the dirt on that side, but that wasn't enough. So Matteo suggests to make a full approach to borrowing parts from the model and use them as the puzzle pieces. So I was doing that before in this really small scale because extractor brush was okay, but I tend to take a small part of the model and use ZBrush or projection feature of the ZBrush to have a one-to-one version of the surface. When Matteo suggests to go crazy with, well, just go with that approach and cut out the model into smaller pieces and use them to rebuild the whole shape. And his suggestion was to just copy paste and duplicate the top part of the branch because that would be really fast, efficient. But I decided to stretch out everything and test my skills and try to learn something new. So in the end, I just cut everything into the small pieces, use move topology brush, and bend everything to receive a convincing effect. And as you can see, it wasn't perfect because I thought I can still use mix my old workflow. So for those empty spaces, when I don't want to waste time trying to figure it out what kind of element of the branch could be used here to fill that gap when the top looks really nice, I thought, okay, I'm just gonna use extractor brush for that small part of the model. It will be perfectly fine instead of doing in the reverse as before. So as you can see, we have quite a lot of small parts. For example, that one. It was borrowed from the back of the branch or from the up here. It doesn't matter. Usually, usual workflow for that is to just mask out part that looks interesting. Use height points or polygroups, whatever that fits your needs. Duplicate model, delete hidden, and with that we have our element separate, and we can where's my model? And we can just move it somewhere when we want and apply it. And then we need to use move topology brush and move topology because let's go to our model. That's gonna be that one, yes. Because when we have all those small separate parts and we use normal move brush, ZBrush move everything at once. So we have two separate elements up here, that's one and that's the other. And by move brush, everything moves. And that's not best solution, especially when we move new element, new puzzle. And for that, to solve that kind of issue, we use move topology. Move topology brush works like a ZBrush take a distance from the center of our brush by size of the brush and move that amount of topology. And that's really nice because when we have those two separate elements, there's no continuity between them, right? So we can make adjustments to just one part independent from the other one and make the connection really nice and fluent without any kind of issues with the normal brush. And after all of that, it was time to create a low poly from our model. And for that, I decided to try Topogun and the second most popular, well, I would say the most popular currently solution, which is CG Cookie Blender plugin Retopology Flow. They offer it for free for non-commercial but because I have a commercial version of Topogun, I decided to use that in the end. But I strongly consider to use a Retopoflow plugin because it's constantly updated, developed when the Topogun is basically dead, or it's updated once per 9 months, which is ridiculous. We need to remember that the Topogun is created by one person, and life is well, we don't know what's happened, but still it's better to use a tool that receives constant updates and new features. So let's jump to the Blender. So let me just pause my screen for a second because I need to load my model. So let's talk about the issue that I had with both softwares, because that's super interesting. The issue happens in the Retopoflow, Topogun, probably other topology tools as well. And it's about the fact that our model is constructed from the different separate independent parts that cross over each other. So the Retopology softwares, as far as I can see, assume that your model, the source model, the high poly model, is one continuous geometry. When in our case with that workflow, we have a separate part. So the software is confused and it don't know where to apply those automatic solutions like poly strips and contours. So let me show you. So we have our model. It looks perfectly fine, but when we use contours up here, come on. Oh, it's laggy. Let's give him a few seconds. When we use contours or any kind of quick retopology solutions that we supposed to use with those softwares, as you can see, something weird happened. That's because software tried to capture top part of the element and everything that's inside. I don't know how to otherwise explain that, but as you can see, it's impossible to retopology. All those manual solutions like poly strips more or less works. Let's make one. Oh, that's a really big one, but as you can see, it's still on the surface. Those works more or less fine, but those contours and everything, it fails. So I thought what kind of solution we can make to solve that issue. And at first I thought, okay, ZBrush, ZModeler, create bridges between those islands, but it was super time consuming. And I figured out we can just use software that is created to solve that kind of issues, and softwares for 3D printing. Because people in that industry received very dirty files with all sorts long list of the issues. And yeah, in my case, Mesh Mixer was the best and fastest solution. So inside of the Mesh Mixer you have something called, where it is, Make It Solid. And software gonna create a connections between those islands, separate part of the model, and create a bridges, geometry, and smooth everything out. You receive a sort few sliders inside of the processing. As you can see, we have 152 holes to fill, but we're gonna skip it to decide how dense your model is and everything. So for my case, because we're gonna use it for retopology, I decided to just play with the sliders to get something usable. So I believe we received, let's import model because I don't see it, Mesh Mixer. Source material was 3 million and the result model was under the 1 million, but that was perfectly fine for retopology. And as you can see, all those holes, let's go to the source model. Obviously they are not aligned because why not? But we don't have any kind of those holes. And what is interesting, all parts that weren't recreated by me by hand, so I mean that element up here, it still fill out with the geometry and add something inside. So additional geometry up here that fill out and make it two sides. But that was perfectly fine for us because when we load that kind of model to Blender, let's do that quickly once again. By the way, I love the fact that I updated that OBJ importer. That speed up everything a lot. So yeah, mesh mixer right away. And where's my model? Import. Oh, hopefully I didn't. Oh shit. Okay, I can just export from the ZBrush. Yeah, that's not ideal situation, but oh well, things happened. So yeah, pay attention. So yeah, once again, import. Are we importing? Yes, we're importing the file. Refresh. And go to the Retopology flow. Now we can use our contour tool without any kind of issues, which is super nice. And we can even try to apply that up here when we have that geometry that goes inside. Obviously we need more resolution to have that poly loop, but it's doing a really great job to create polygons on the surface. So the problem is solved mostly. As you can see, it's not perfect, but that's still something that we can just move by hand or something like that, and yeah, problem solved. So from that I create I make a mix between hand topology and automatic solution. So the main part of the trunk I use the contours and everything, for small tweaks as well, and for the roots. But the biggest issue I had with the main part of the there's our example of the trunk part, because it was very wavy, complex. So I thought, okay, I will not retopology that by hand because it's gonna take me a lot of time. I have no experience with the hand retopology as much as I wish. So I thought, okay, I know different tricks. So for branches and roots, I make everything by hand, connections and everything. And for those complex elements up here, I make connections by polystrips or ZModeler plugin to connect those separate islands. For example, we have a poly loop here, and I make one polystrip that goes like this. Let's say it connects those two elements up here. We need bigger brush. Yeah, like this. And from there it was going up here, and let's say it ends here. So we have an empty space up here, and I use a close hole. So for example, like this, we have an empty space. I use ZModeler on the edge, close, because that keeps UVs, and even if we don't have a UVs, I have that habit to use ZModeler instead of ZBrush source that remove UV information, because then we can just take that part, UV unwrap it separately, merge, and everything works perfectly fine. So when we have a closed hole element, we separate it and go to geometry, Z remesher. We select freeze border, because then ZBrush make retopology but don't modify those edges, and because we have a quads up there, right, it's something that we want to keep. And so with the freeze border, legacy mode or standard mode, that doesn't matter that much. Legacy is more focused on the organic stuff, and when we click it, we received really nice, quick, automatic topology that we can modify further if we want to our taste with ZModeler, stitch points, or you can go back to Blender or whatever and make those retopology refinements up there. I prefer to stick with ZBrush because I sit in that software many years, so it's way faster for me to make those changes up here. So something like this, and that's it. Oh, we can even move it here. So that was my approach to the whole model. It was time consuming, but in the end I was very glad that I decided to add something new, especially for not the easiest model, because I learned a couple new things. And after that, obviously, I was unwrapping. There's nothing complex here. I use Rhizome UV, a software that I use many years as well. Polygroups, whatever. You can use Blender, that doesn't matter. And after that was time to reproject my texture from the source material that recreated with those small separate elements, because once again we cut out them, and ZBrush keep those UV information when you delete hidden, so that feature here that you can find under the, let's see, tools, geometry, delete hidden. If you hold control button, you received a path to particle button. So let's go tools, we are in the tools, right? Under the geometry, and there will be that modify, close and delete hidden. So when we use that feature, ZBrush keeps UV information, and when we use UV master to confirm that, you're gonna see a lot of Z fighting in the places, because we are in the polygroup mode, which keeps color. Okay, so let's zoom in. We have UVs, but some elements are way darker, and as you can see, we have a Z fighting between those polygroups for elements that are just duplicated. So most of the model is not duplicated, because that's the top of the model, and those elements that we borrow from that part and move it elsewhere still keep that texture. So when I load that model reconstructed in that way to Metashape, Reality Capture, Marmoset toolbag, whatever you use to rebake diffuse map, color map to your low poly, you receive 100% quality from the source, which is great, because we want as much quality as possible, right? So the only thing that left after that was to go to Substance Painter, paint over, clone stamp tool, seamless materials. Previous workflow works really well. There was no any kind of issues with that. To paint over any kind of issues with the seams. But usually when I was applying and mix those two, those small elements, I try to use texture loaded to ZBrush, because you can always load a texture up here, and you can even use the different maps if you want, but I use our source material texture to see what I'm doing at the current moment. So I took most part of the tree and place it in the space when I expect to see a moss, and make a blend between wood, moss, grass, dirt, whatever. So in the end, there was not much cleanup texturing job. So with that said, let's jump right away to Maverick Indie that I use for my renders, and let's jump to the goal scene. At first, I was thinking about using Epic Game Twinmotion solution for my renders, especially because they have a emulation feature up there. That's the Twinmotion. but I had a lot of issues to set up lighting to what I like. So I decided to just move to Maverick and use Quixel Megascans library up there. But for creating a concept idea, it was super nice, because still I was able to see how I like my object with the Megascans library. In theory, we're supposed to capture those foliage around our object by ourselves, create a foliage atlas and everything, but there was not time for me because I was capturing other elements as well. And yeah, so with Twinmotion, in the end, I just make a quick concept tests. Do I like it with the grass? Do I like it with the naked ground? Or maybe with the plants? Obviously, I made a list of things that that object contained around it itself, and I use an Irish website that is about the taxonomy of the plants. It's gonna be in the description on the right side of the project, so you can go there and check what kind of plants you can find in Ireland. And I make a list of things that grow up and compare it with the Megascans to pick up anything that is similar or identical with my area. And yeah, so I made a concept art and then decide, okay, I want to play with those grass elements, and in the end with the plants. So once again, let's see plants up here. I believe there's supposed to be a grass as well, but no, it's not. It's turned off. I made the whole scene and everything, and very important thing is to always add a human scale model to scale everything correctly. As you can see, oh yeah, there's a grass asset that I at first use, but then I move to plants because I really like the May bells that grow up in my area as well. So as you can see, there's a grass model, and then I move to May bells, I populate them, and I try to find as much reference as possible. I went back to the scene when I captured the object to see what kind of fern grow up, what kind of grass, other elements. And I found pictures of the May bells in the internet to see how they grow up, how much space is between those particular plants. I didn't want any kind of picture from the gardens because it wasn't consistent with the wild growing May bells. And that's the concept art that I decided to use as my inspiration. I really like the idea of the pure blackness and one mini diorama or scene with our model. Not particular on the black background. I saw variation on the gray or something like that. But for my likeness, I really like that big contrast between everything, because light can emphasize edges of everything, and that works really well, and I really like it. Yeah, so in the end I use maples, fern and other plants that grow up, that is visible up here. I'm not sure what it is in particular. There was I believe a Latin name for that plant, but anyway, it will grow in my around that trunk. So I use those, and I could use my ground material, but I believe I use the Megascan as well, just for sake of the to make that project as fast as possible, because I don't like to spend. I prefer to avoid spending 2 weeks or 2 months over the creating the presentation when the main recreation job takes so long with the new process. And then there was a post-processing part. Let's go to the render. It wasn't big philosophy. up here I purchased a presentation pack of the light, I don't know, sun rays and everything, and smoke elements. It wasn't that complex, just add some smoke elements, lower the strength of the layer, and in the end I use small particles really lightly to add some play on in the sun rays. So yeah, that's the process from A to Z. I believe that post-processing and presentation could be better, but it's just a start of the refining that skill. In the future, for sure, I'm gonna try to capture the foliage by myself and use it to create that diorama, offer a client the bigger pack than just one single model. Would be really nice to add model plus a bonus pack of the small plants or anything that can enrich and allow the client to create the scene by himself, herself, from my work, right? And I believe that there's nothing else to add. Let me quickly think. Yeah, basically that's it. So see you next time. Thank you for watching that video. I know it wasn't the shortest one, but hopefully you learned something from it. And yeah, have a nice day.